The snow fell so thick it swallowed the sky, a curtain of white erasing all color and sound, until only the whisper of the wind remained, a whisper that cut like knives against Thery Dawson's cheeks as he trudged through the Colorado wilderness. Each breath vanished into the cold mist, each step sinking deeper into the silence of a world untouched. It had been 2 years since he left the army, 2 years of retreating from the noise of memory and the weight of loss, finding solace only in the solitude of the mountains. His only companion was Mitza, a retired canine shepherd with amber eyes that understood more than words could say. They shared the same scars, the same quiet ache that time refused to heal. That morning was meant to be a simple walk before the storm came in, but nature had other plans. The sky turned the color of iron, the wind began to howl, and within moments the snow thickened into a blinding whiteout. Mitza, usually calm, stopped mid-stride. Her ears shot up, tail stiff, and then she barked, not the alert bark of danger, nor the playful one of excitement, but something different, something almost desperate. Thery frowned and followed her gaze into the haze. "What is it, girl?" he shouted over the wind, but Mitza didn't wait. She lunged forward, vanishing into the storm. Thery's instincts took over. He ran after her, the cold biting his lungs, his boots slipping on hidden ice, until he saw her, digging furiously at the base of a collapsed snowbank. The sound of claws against ice was frantic, relentless. Thery dropped to his knees beside her, and then he saw it, a small pale hand sticking out of the snow. Dear God! His own fingers were numb, but he clawed through the drift, ignoring the sting and blood that followed. Together they unearthed a boy, maybe 10 years old, limp and frozen, his lips blue, his chest still. Mitza whimpered and licked the child's face as Thery pressed his hands to the boy's sternum. "Stay with me, kid. Come on, breathe." He began compressions, counting under his breath, exhaling into cold, unresponsive lungs. Minutes stretched into eternity. The storm screamed around them, the world reduced to snow, breath, and willpower. Thery's hands trembled with exhaustion, yet he refused to stop. "Don't you die on me," he rasped, voice breaking. "I already lost one son. I'm not losing another." With the last of his strength, he wrapped the boy in his coat, pulling him tight against his chest to share warmth. Then, step by step, he carried him back through the blizzard. By the time he reached the cabin, his body was near collapse, his fingers stiff and bleeding, his face raw from frost. Inside, the wood stove had nearly gone out. He dropped to the floor, stoked the embers, and breathed life into the flame until orange light filled the room. He laid the boy near the hearth, stripped away wet clothes and rubbed his arms, whispering over and over, "It's okay. You're safe. Now." Mitza lay close, eyes fixed on the boy. Then a sound, a shallow, broken gasp. Thery froze, then leaned in, another breath, faint but real. Relief surged through him, overwhelming and raw, and tears spilled down his cheeks. He laughed and sobbed at once, clutching the child as if anchoring him to life. Minutes later, the boy's eyelids fluttered open, revealing gray-blue eyes like fog after dawn. "What's your name?" Thery asked softly. The boy hesitated, voice barely a whisper. "Lucas." He shivered, clutching something in his hand, a small silver bracelet, glinting in the firelight, engraved with 2 letters. "TM." Thery stared at it, his heart lurching in his chest. Mitza noticed too, sniffing the bracelet before turning to Thery with a knowing gaze. Thery's mind raced. He had seen that bracelet before, 10 years ago, on the wrist of his own son, the one lost in a house fire that had consumed everything he loved. For years, there had been no trace, no body, nothing but ashes and regret. Now, in this frozen miracle, that symbol had returned. The storm still howled outside, but inside the small cabin, time stood still. Thery's throat tightened as he looked at the sleeping boy, at Mitza lying faithfully beside him, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "If this is how God tests a father's heart," he whispered, voice breaking, "then I'm ready." Outside, the wind carried the echo of his words into the endless white, as if the mountains themselves bore witness to the fragile line between loss and redemption. 3 days after the storm, the mountains lay still beneath a pale morning sun, the snow sparkling like a sea of diamonds. There stood outside his cabin, staring at the horizon where the world had been chaos just days ago. Inside, Lucas sat near the hearth, pale but stronger, sipping the hot cocoa Thery had made for him. The boy still spoke little, though his eyes often wandered to the window, where Mitza chased shadows across the snow. There was something hauntingly old in those eyes, as if he carried memories too heavy for a child. They watched him quietly, the flicker of firelight revealing the soft silver gleam of the bracelet around his wrist. "Do you remember anything?" he asked gently. Lucas shook his head. "Only that someone told me never to lose this," he whispered, clutching the bracelet. "They said it was important." Before Thery could respond, a distant hum rolled through the valley. Engines. He stepped outside. From beyond the trees, a convoy of black SUVs emerged, tires crunching on frozen ground. The sight was so foreign to the mountain's solitude it felt almost dreamlike. The first vehicle stopped before his cabin. A tall man stepped out, wrapped in a dark wool coat, his breath steaming in the cold. His face was marked by fatigue, yet his presence was commanding. "Are you Thery Dawson?" he asked. Thery nodded cautiously. The man extended a gloved hand. "Charles Tarrant, I've been searching for my son." Behind him a door opened, and Lucas appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening. "Father!" The boy ran through the snow, stumbling into the man's embrace. Charles exhaled sharply, clutching him as if afraid he might vanish again. Thery stood frozen, unsure whether to feel relief or loss. Charles looked up, tears in his eyes. "You saved him," he said. "I can never repay that." Thery forced a smile. "I'm just glad he's alive." "Please," Charles continued, voice trembling between gratitude and disbelief, "let me thank you properly. Come to my home in Aspen. We owe you more than words." For a long moment, Thery said nothing. The boy was safe. That should have been enough, yet something deep within him stirred. A quiet unease he couldn't name. He finally nodded. "All right." Mitza barked softly, as if sensing that the journey ahead would change everything. The Tarrant estate sat high above the valley, carved into the hillside like a monument to wealth and silence. Glass walls reflected the last light of evening. Snow melted into rippling gold beneath the setting sun. When Thery stepped out of the car, the contrast between the wilderness he knew and this world of polished perfection struck him like a whisper of another life. Lucas ran ahead, calling Mitza to follow, his laughter echoing off the marble. Inside, warmth and scent of cedar filled the vast halls. Chandeliers shimmered like frozen rain. Portraits of strangers lined the walls. And in the heart of the great room, a grand piano played itself, soft, distant, melancholic. Charles guided Thery to a seat near the fire, handing him a glass of aged whiskey. "You've built quite a life out here," Thery said, glancing around. "It's not mine," Charles replied with a faint smile. "It belongs to charity, to the foundation. I just manage it." He paused, eyes clouded. "Lucas came into my life 10 years ago. They said he was the only survivor from a terrible fire during a charity gala. He had no name, no memory, just that bracelet." The word hit Thery like an echo. Fire. Bracelet. 10 years. He looked down into the amber swirl of his drink, his pulse quickening. Charles noticed. "You look like you've heard this story before." Thery forced a slow breath. "Maybe I have." Across the room, Lucas sat at the piano, pressing soft notes with small fingers, while Mitza lay beside him, ears twitching, as though following a sound only she could hear. The dog lifted her head suddenly, growling low. not with fear, but recognition. Her gaze fixed on a silver picture frame atop the mantel. There turned. In the photograph, a much younger Charles held a soot-streaked toddler, wrapped in a rescue blanket. Around the boy's wrist glimmered the same silver bracelet engraved TM. The air thickened. Thery's grip tightened around the glass until it trembled. Charles followed his eyes, unaware of the storm that had just risen inside the man across from him. "It's the first day we met," Charles said softly. He wouldn't let go of that bracelet. Thery didn't respond. In the flicker of the firelight, memories began to bleed through the years. The sirens, the smoke, the desperate hands that never found what they were searching for. Lucas's laugh carried across the room, bright and fragile, piercing through the ache that had settled in Thery's chest. He looked at the boy, then at the man who had raised him, and felt the fragile edges of two worlds begin to collide. When Thery entered the Tarun estate again 2 days later, the memory of that photograph hadn't left his mind. It haunted him through the quiet nights, replaying behind his eyelids like a film he couldn't stop watching. The boy in the frame, soot-stained and trembling, the silver bracelet gleaming under a paramedic's light. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was the same bracelet, the same letters, the same haunting detail that tied past to present. Now, as he followed Charles through the vast hallway lined with glass and cedar, he felt the weight of something vast and invisible pressing on his chest. The air smelled of old wood and faint smoke from the fireplace, like the ghost of a memory refusing to fade. Lucas was waiting in the great room, kneeling beside Mitza, giggling as the dog pawed at his sleeve. The laughter was bright, genuine, too pure for the heaviness that wrapped the adults in silence. Charles poured coffee and gestured toward the couch. "You've been quiet, Thery," he said softly. "Something on your mind?" Thery stared into the cup. "Just thinking how strange it is, how people cross paths, like threads that were cut long ago, somehow tying themselves back together." Charles smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I used to believe in chance. Not anymore." He sipped, his voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "I told you about the fire. The night I found Lucas, everything around him was burning. He was clinging to that bracelet, whispering a name I couldn't make out. He wouldn't let go. I thought it was divine, like God wanted me to save him." Thery looked up, his voice low but firm. "What year was it?" 2013, Charles replied, and something inside Thery broke open. He turned his gaze toward Lucas, whose soft humming filled the space like a lullaby. It was the same tune his own wife used to sing, the melody that once lulled their baby to sleep. His chest tightened, the air thinning around him. Charles noticed the sudden stillness. "Thery?" he asked, concerned. But before Thery could respond, Mitza lifted her head sharply, ears twitching. The dog's gaze locked on the silver bracelet as if drawn to it by instinct. She stood, walked to the mantel and sniffed at the framed photo again. Then she let out a low growl, deep, mournful, almost human. Lucas stopped playing and looked at her. "What's wrong, girl?" he asked. Thery stood slowly, his heart pounding in his ears. He joined the dog before the photo. His trembling fingers brushed the frame, tracing the bracelet in the image. "Where did you get this picture?" he whispered. "It was taken by the firefighters that night," Charles said. "Why?" Thery turned toward him, his voice barely audible. "Because I was there." The room froze. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Charles frowned. "I don't understand." Thery's jaw tightened. "That night, I lost my wife and my son in that fire. No one survived. Or so they told me." His voice cracked on the last word. Charles's face paled, his cup trembling slightly. "Are you saying—" "I don't know," Thery interrupted, his voice raw. "All I know is that bracelet belonged to my boy. His name was Theo. Theo Michael Dawson. I had it made for his first birthday." The initials hung in the air like a verdict. T.M. Lucas's eyes widened. He looked down at the bracelet, then at Thery. "Theo," he whispered softly, as if testing the name against the echoes in his mind. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled, filling the silence with the sound of time breathing. Charles stepped back, confusion and disbelief warring in his face. "If this is true, then everything I've believed, everything I've built around him—" His voice trailed off, unable to finish. Thery looked at him with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. "You saved him when I couldn't," he said quietly. "Maybe that's what was meant to happen." Mitza rested her head against Lucas's knee, sighing deeply, as if the weight of the truth had reached even her. The boy touched her fur, tears welling in his eyes. "I don't remember the fire," he whispered. "Only the sound of someone calling my name." Thery's eyes softened. "That was me." The words broke something open in both of them. Lucas rose slowly and walked toward him, uncertain, yet drawn by something deeper than reason. He reached out a trembling hand and touched Thery's scarred palm. "It feels familiar," he said quietly. The world outside the glass walls glowed blue with the coming snow, and inside, 3 lives stood suspended in a silence too heavy for words. None of them knew what would happen next, but for the first time, Thery felt that maybe the whisper of the past had been leading them all to this moment. The world outside the Terran estate was wrapped in stillness, the kind that comes only after a long storm. The snow gleamed untouched under a sky so pale it looked almost holy. Inside, however, the air felt thick with unspoken truths. Charles stood near the window, holding a cream-colored envelope in trembling hands. Thery sat across from him, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth, his expression unreadable. Between them lay a silence that pulsed like a heartbeat. The test results had arrived that morning, but neither man had the courage to break the seal. It was Lucas who finally did it. The boy stepped forward, voice soft but steady. "Please, just open it." Charles drew a breath, then tore the envelope slowly. The sound of paper ripping was louder than the wind outside. His eyes moved down the page, reading once, then again, as if refusing to believe what they saw. When he finally looked up, his gaze found Thery's. His lips trembled, and in a whisper barely above breath he said, 99.97%. He's yours." The words hung in the air, shimmering with both relief and heartbreak. Thery didn't move. For a long time he just stared at the floor, as though the weight of those numbers was too much to bear. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "All these years, I prayed for an answer. I just didn't know it would hurt this much to receive it." Charles nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "I didn't steal him from you," he said softly. "I only found a boy who needed love, and in saving him, maybe I was trying to save myself." Thery looked up then, meeting the man's gaze with a quiet understanding. "You didn't take him. You kept him alive when I couldn't. For that, I owe you more than words." Lucas watched them both, confusion and fear swirling in his young eyes. "So, who am I?" he whispered. Thery turned to him, kneeling until they were eye level. "You're Lucas to him," he said gently, "and Theo to me. But most of all, you're our son." The boy's lip quivered, tears spilling down his cheeks as he threw himself into Thery's arms. Thery held him tight, burying his face in the boy's hair, feeling the warmth, the heartbeat, the miracle of life returned. Charles watched them, pain and gratitude fighting across his features, then turned toward the window. "Maybe this is what grace looks like," he murmured. "Not getting what we want, but what we need." The storm outside had cleared completely now. Sunlight spilled through the glass, touching every surface with a golden glow. Mitza padded forward, her paws silent on the wood, and rested her head against Lucas's leg, tail wagging slowly as if to say, "We're home now." Later, the three of them stood outside on the terrace overlooking the valley. The air was crisp, the kind that tastes of snow and beginnings. Charles placed a hand on Thery's shoulder. "You saved my son," he said, "but maybe he was sent to save us both." Thery nodded, his voice steady but soft. "God works in ways we'll never fully understand." They stood in silence, three souls bound by loss and redemption, the mountain wind brushing gently against their faces. Mitza lifted her muzzle to the sky and released a long, melodic howl, a sound not of sorrow, but of gratitude. It echoed through the valley, rising and fading like a hymn. Lucas laughed through his tears and pressed closer to Thery's side. The man smiled, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. The light caught the silver bracelet, now gleaming as if newly forged, its letters, TM, shining in the dawn. For the first time in years, Thery felt peace. The weight of grief that had clung to him since the fire dissolved in the morning air, replaced by something gentler, quieter, a faith that what was lost can sometimes be found again, just in a different form. Behind them, the house glowed with warmth, and ahead, the valley opened like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Their turn to Charles, voice firm but kind. "No one really owns a miracle," he said. "We just get to hold it for a while." Charles smiled, nodding through tears. "Then let's hold it well." The wind rose again, carrying with it the faint echo of Mitza's final howl, and somewhere deep in that sound, there was the sense of an ending and a beginning. As the sun climbed higher, melting the last traces of storm from the mountain, three figures stood side by side in the golden light, their shadows long and unbroken across the snow.